Dr. Martha Bone. I want to give you some for English 101 online. I wanted to give you some help for paper 3. Paper 3 is a comparison paper where you compare The Fall of the House of Usher to another work which is Gothic in nature. How on earth do you start this? Well, the first thing you do is pick what you want to compare. Now, I'm going to be watching your papers, and if two people do the same thing, I will check on that. So try to find something you think is going to work for you, and please make sure to do your own work because you don't want to get a 0 at this point in the class. This is a World War II museum t-shirt. I'm freezing. Anyway, okay, just wanted you to know in case it was making you try to figure out what it was. Okay, now, so you've picked out the other thing, and I'm going to talk about what I'm going to write about if I write a paper. And that is, what I'm going to do is compare The Fall of the House of Usher to Young Frankenstein with Gene, I'll think of his name. Okay, so in the first paragraph, I'm going to say that The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. Always give the titles and authors when you're writing about literature. The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe and Young Frankenstein are both Gothic stories. I might, if I was, and although, and I'm going to say, of course, somewhere, that Young Frankenstein's a movie. And I don't think it's based on a book. It was written for the movies. So, even though they are both Gothic, and I'm going to have to work on my sentences, but this is the introduction. Say what you're going to say. Okay? You have to tell the reader what you're going to say. Say what you're going to say. Say it. Say what you said. Introduction, body, conclusion. Now, where was I? Okay, so I've given the titles. By the way, make a short title for your paper. I've been getting some really awful titles, so come up with something. Make it short. Gothic stories or whatever. Now, Gothic stories is awfully simple. Come up with something. Anyway, so, and then I'm going to come up with 3 things that I'm going to compare because I'm going by that paper about the 5-paragraph theme. I'm going to have an introduction, then I'm going to talk about 3 specific things. Now, you do not want to retell the story when you're writing about literature or movies or TV shows. You assume that your reader, if she hasn't already read it, and most of these I haven't, but if she hasn't already read it or he hasn't already read it, they will read it or they'll find it on Netflix and watch it. Or they'll go rent, you don't rent movies anymore. They'll get the DVD or buy it on Netflix and watch the movie. Don't summarize. Just don't tell the story. You have a sentence or 2. You're going to tell what happens in the story. So don't summarize everything in the story. Don't retell the story. Okay, now, how am I going to find those 3 things I'm going to talk about? Because if you tell me one thing, first you tell me about Fall of the House of Usher, and then you tell me about Young Frankenstein, what you're going to end up doing is retelling the story. Trust me. So what I'm going to do is, this is my list of the characteristics of the Gothic. So I'm going to take this list. Now, if you do not want to use my list, that's fine. There are hundreds of lists and articles about the Gothic on the internet. And all you got to do is type in Gothic on your search engine. Please do not use somebody else's group of articles. Just find your own stuff. Okay. A data thing. Don't use a data thing. Okay. So I'm going to come up with those things. Now, I've got my list. So what I'm going to do, if you can see this line, on one side, I'm going to put The Fall of the House of Usher. And on the other side, I'm going to put Young Frankenstein. Now, I've just done that. Ugh, I can't do these things. There we go. So, I've just done that in pencil. And I'm going to go down the list and see what's here. So, they both have a young woman in them. That's interesting with Young Frankenstein, because in The Fall of the House of Usher, there's Madeline, but in Young Frankenstein, there are 3 women. And Madeline is sick in bed all the time, dying, wasting away. But in Young Frankenstein, there's a female servant played by Cloris Leachman, who is scary. The horses all carry on every time she opens her mouth. But the other 2, Dr. Frankenstein, he says, is his name, Dr. Frankenstein's fiance, who is Madeline Kahn. I think that's her last name. Anyway, she is so funny. And she falls in love with the monster at the end and sings, "Oh, Sweet Mystery of Life, at last I found you." Anyway, and then the third one, whose name is escaping me right now, but she is a really sexy young girl. Frankenstein says about her, there's a door knocker there, and he says, "Wow, what knockers." And she says, "Thank you." It's very funny. All right, so I'm probably going to do that just because it's funny. And all the time, I'm going to say, again, this one's serious. I don't have to say every time, this one's serious and that one's funny. But I have to put, I think, in paragraph 1, that Young Frankenstein is a parody of the Gothic. Now, you see, I'm talking out here and reasoning about how I'm going to write this paper. You need to do that. Say out loud what you're going to do, because it helps everything. No joke. It helps if you're learning to cook, change a tire, anything. It helps to say it out loud. So now I'm going to go back, my introductory paragraph that I've talked about. I'm going to put in there, remember to say parody. I'm going to write it down on my sheet. Parody. Okay. And very funny. Well, so I'm probably going to do the girl. I'm probably not. They both have spooky castles. But I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do that one. But I'm going to put it on my list. They both have it. Because I'm going to decide later. Documents, yes. They both have documents. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing about this, and I'm going to stick this in somewhere, even if it's not my major one, that they both have not just documents, but a whole darn library, both of them. Physical deformities. Now, I know right away that I'm going to use the physical deformities. So I'm going to put those on my list and put a star or something by it. And here's why. The physical deformities in The Fall of the House of Usher are implied. They're not what we normally call a physical deformity. You know, they don't have a lump on their back. They're not whatever. Missing limbs. They don't have 2 heads. Whatever it is, there are no nothing that we would actually call a physical deformity, but it's always implied. His skin is so thin. I'm going to quote from the story about the way Roderick looks and the way his sister looks. The deformity is implied. I love that because it's implied and not just thrown in our faces. Now, for the physical deformity in Young Frankenstein is obvious, because he makes a monster from a dead body and gets the brain from a laboratory, and he picks up the wrong brain and gets a monster's brain. So that's going to be, I think, my last topic. I like to put my strongest one at the end. So now my 5-paragraph theme, I've got about what's going to be in the introduction, and one of the paragraphs is going to be about physical deformities, although I may, stick a sentence on it about some other things that are the same. There are no Italians or Mediterranean types, although there's some really weird people in Young Frankenstein. Anyway, and if you can't tell me that the ushers are weird, you're mistaken. But I'm really not going to think about that. That's not a big one. And they are not Italians or Mediterranean types, and I'm going by my list. Now, you may have a different list. You can get one from the internet if you don't want to listen, or if you didn't take notes from my first lecture and you don't want to take notes, don't want to use my list. You can get one from the internet. That gives you one of your internet sources. So it's not a bad thing to do. Okay, extremes of nature. I already know I'm going to do that. So that's going to be my second biggie. Extremes of nature. You can't see that, but you can hear it. Extremes of nature. The reason I'm going to do that is because I can bring in some of the description which Poe gives us from the very first of the story and quote a line or two. And because in Young Frankenstein, the movie, Frankenstein, the monster, is put on this elevator and pushed up through the ceiling, and in this terrible lightning storm, it strikes him, and that's where it's kind of like using those paddles to start somebody's heart. Only this is a huge lightning bolt. So the extremes of nature are there. I can talk about the tarn, and I might even be able to go from physical deformities to extremes of nature, because certainly both of the deformities are extremes of nature too, and put an additional extreme. I got carried away there, so I'm going to X that out and not do that. Religion, witchcraft, fortune tellers, no. They're mesmerism or the supernatural. Now, the supernatural is in Young Frankenstein. It is not really in The Fall of the House of Usher, but it's implied. So I'm going to say that. I don't think that's there. And then the last thing, there are no medieval trappings. Now, some of you want to say that the castle they're in The Fall of the House of Usher is medieval. It is not. It is Gothic. It is Gothic. Okay? Medieval does not look like a Gothic cathedral, and those houses do. So the last one is a despicable crime, and certainly I'm going to talk about that. In The Fall of the House of Usher, I'm going to talk about, wait a minute, I'm getting it. In The Fall of the House of Usher, I'm going to talk about the implied incest. The implied incest. And burying your sister alive. Not a good thing to do, is it? In Young Frankenstein, of course, the despicable crime is digging up a dead body, creating a monster, even though it's a spoof. Even though it's a spoof. That's gross, right? Despicable. In our culture, and in the culture of Europe, and everywhere else except some weird places, I imagine even cannibals, they have a ritual. Makes me a little ill, but they have a ritual. The American Indians, some tribes, put the bodies of the deceased up on a pyre and either left it there for the birds of the air to destroy, or they burned it. But every culture has some kind of ritual for the deceased to treat our loved ones with dignity. It's an important thing. Those of you who have lost family members, and certainly I have lost many, that's an important thing. It's an important thing. Anyway, okay, get off that and go on. So I'm going to write about three things. Physical deformities, extremes of nature, and despicable crimes. Probably in that order because I'm feeling that way right now. I might start with the extremes of nature and put physical deformities in the middle. But I'm going to write about those three things. When I write about physical deformity, I'm going to write about it in both the short story, the serious short story, and the spoof. When I write about the extremes of nature, I'm going to write about what it's like in the spoof and what it's like in the serious Poe story. And the same in paragraph 4. You know, I'm doing that 5-paragraph theme. I've got my introductory paragraphs and then physical deformity paragraph, extremes of nature paragraph, now the despicable crime in The Fall of the House of Usher and in Young Frankenstein. Now, every time I'm going to talk about when it's implied, a word I really like, a thing that I really like because, especially for my paper, because one is a spoof and one is serious. And serious literature doesn't beat you over the head. So, I have a student waiting. I wish they wouldn't tell me that. I'll be finished in a minute. So, then I'm going to have a conclusion. And I'm going to say, despite one of these, the fact that one of these is a short story and the other one is a film, one of them is a spoof, and one of them is quite serious and frightening. And even this, there are no scary things in Young Frankenstein. It's just fun. And I'm going to talk about implication, because in serious work, things are implied. In spoofs, you're just hit over the head with it. Think about something on Saturday Night Live or any satire that you like, any spoof where you are making fun of the original. If you haven't watched any of that, shame on you. But Saturday Night Live is the original spoof, especially the very beginning. Anyway, okay. Then I'm going to write my conclusion. Now, what else do you need to know? How are you going to get all of these sources? Well, you're going to ask your friends. You need 3 people. You're going to ask them whatever. Do you know what the Gothic novel is? Where did the idea of the Goth come from? It came from a place in Europe, in Germany, called Goth, actually. You can look that up on the internet and use that as a source. So it can be on the internet, and then you can ask your friends, did you know this? Ask them if they have watched any Gothic things. What do they think on TV is Gothic? Do they know anything about Edgar Allan Poe? Have they watched the other Gothic thing that you're going to use? So any of those things. Now, what can you do for more sources? You've got to quote from The Fall of the House of Usher. You have to quote from the thing you're comparing to it. And, of course, you can get a list on the internet if you want to use that source. Then all sorts of things that you can type into your search engine. Type in Gothic. Type in Gothic literature. Type in character. Spoof, if you're doing a spoof, if you're doing something funny. Type in the names of the characters. Go on IMDb. That's the International Movie Database. Just type it in, IMDb. They have every movie, every TV program that's ever been done. They'll have a little something about it. That's a good source. You can also look up, for example, imply. You can look up any of the characteristics I've given you. Another thing you might look up is the word frame. The story, The Fall of the House of Usher, has a frame. It is the castle. So I might put that in there. A frame is like a picture frame. That story starts with that castle and it ends with the castle. And it holds the story together like a picture frame. Okay. If you have any questions, if you cannot find sources, send me an email. Okay? And I will do my best to answer you and make some suggestions. Okay? All right. Good luck on paper 3. Now remember, we're at the end of school. After Thanksgiving, we have 1 week before finals. So you need to be reading Stephen King, and you have to watch the movie The Bridge of Spies. Okay? Because the test will be over mostly The Bridge of Spies and King. I'm going to ask 1 or 2 little questions about the articles. But you've already read them and you've already had tests. One of the things you can do to study is look over the old tests. Okay? Also, if you will do the faculty appraiser, the teacher evaluation, which is on the website. I know every student's been emailed about it. I will give you 10 extra points on the Stephen King test. And I'm going to tell you next week how I'm fixing that. So there's just 1 grade, and it's your highest grade. Okay? So those 10 points might help. All right. Good luck. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Turkey Day. Remember, you are what you eat.